The Delegate from Shenandoah, Delegate Gilbert.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the comments from the delegate from Norfolk. And I appreciated many of the other comments that have been made on the floor today. We find ourselves in a time in our history where emotions are running very high on an issue where we routinely find very little common ground. Recent days in this country have witnessed another tragedy of unimaginable proportions. And we all try to deal with that in our own way. Whatever our walk of faith is, whatever our political views are, we try to deal with such tragedies in a way we understand and find comforting to ourselves. But we have sat here for a week and listened to the other side of the aisle accuse us in every different way they can, sometimes subtle, sometimes not. Republicans were accused by a member of the other caucus of being complicit with Nazis and terrorists and Al-Qaeda. We are told, not on this floor, but by those who support some people on this floor over and over and over again, that because we stand up for one of America's oldest and most fundamental civil liberties, that we have blood on our hands. And that fever pitch of emotion, that rhetoric that rises to the level of accusing people who believe in our freedoms and liberties of being complicit with the deranged acts of a madman and a murderer, it's too much for us, many of us, to stomach. And so we've listened quietly. We've sat here and listened. We've been accused over and over again. And so I just want the gentleman from Norfolk to understand, as well as the other members of his caucus, that sometimes we can only take about so much of that. And we are willing to talk about how we can try to stop these hideous acts of violence. And we can talk about the failings of government at social services, the mental health services, local and state and federal law enforcement over and over and over again, the school system, all of them having opportunities to intervene in this tragedy before it happened. But the only response we hear from the other side of the aisle is, we got to take away everybody's guns. That's the solution, not the dozens of other times we had to stop this before it happened. So we get emotional about this too, Mr. Speaker, because we know those solutions being proposed by the other side of the aisle relate to a very different agenda than trying to stop acts of violence like this. We would like to stop acts of violence like this. We would like to hold criminals accountable for their criminal acts. That's not a proposition that is held in high favor on the other side of the political divide anymore. We would like to hold students accountable for their disciplinary problems in schools so that someday they don't result in acts of violence like this. We are willing to work on this problem, and we have expressed an openness.
Mr. Speaker.
Delegate Scott.
Point of order.
Delegate has the floor.
Under Rules 58, 59, and 60 of the Rules of the House, is not the gentleman out of order for making a comment which he knows is not true, that this notion that criminals should be held responsible for their criminal acts is not a position that people on this side of the aisle agree with? He knows that is not true. That is violating the rules of the House. Would ask the Speaker to sanction him for those inappropriate comments.
I would say to the gentleman at this point right now, I would advise everyone who's extremely emotional, I think on both sides of the aisle, that everyone needs to take a deep breath. Delegate will wrap up his comments. We're going to move on to the calendar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I invite anyone to objectively look at the various agendas regarding the issue that the gentleman just raised in taking further offense to things we're saying over here today, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have in recent years added to the money that school systems can use to harden their defenses against such acts, to put locks and buzzers and cameras and barriers of all kinds. That is an initiative by this assembly to try to make schools actually safer for our students and the people that work there. My mother's been a teacher in our public schools for 36 years, Mr. Speaker. This is an issue that is very, very personal to me. I know what she's had to endure in that school, being threatened herself, being assaulted herself. This is very personal to me, school safety as well. We have given our school systems the additional tools to hire armed security so that not just in response to these kinds of attacks, but to deter them, somebody entering that school would know that there is a retired law enforcement officer ready to take them on and meet them with like force.
Mr. Speaker,
the gentleman has another point of order, Mr. Speaker. I apologize.
Delegate may state it.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, is not the morning hour concluded now, even with the recess?
We have 2 minutes. We had exactly 15 minutes. I looked at the clock. Gentleman has 2 minutes.
Thank you. Should I allot another minute for the gentleman to make another point of order, or should I try to use the whole 2 minutes, Mr. Speaker? I would inquire.
Mr. Speaker?
I would say to the gentleman, 2 minutes. Delegate Shenandoah has the floor.
Well, I was concluding, and I again don't think I need to point out, given the angst demonstrated just recently, how emotional this issue is. And so I offered that in sort of putting it in context, maybe why people felt very raw about the response they had to some of the things that have been said on this floor in recent days. I had a constituent, Mr. Speaker, send me some wet wipes telling me that I should use those to wipe the blood of America's children off my hands. So we're tired of it too, okay? We want to find common sense solutions. We want to work together, and we all need to ratchet down the emotion and the rhetoric for us to accomplish that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Clerk shall